Okay, so I would like to start with you maybe telling a little bit about yourself. I kind of did stalk you, and I know you're a husband and a father and a software guy, but I'm sure there's more to it. So I'd love to hear a bit more about yourself.
Okay, so so husband, I got three girls. They're all older, but they weren't in this last business. So this particular startup that we're talking about, I just had we started in 2011. She was born in November of 2011. I started in December of 2011 with this company. And so, there's a lot of stuff going on around young kids at the time. I have been a software developer my entire adult life. I started out, I did 4 years of ROTC in high school. I had a 4-year full ride scholarship to any college in Arizona through the United States Air Force. Was really excited to accept that. It was a very competitive process, and I failed the physical. And so all of a sudden my college plans went out the window. Probably could have gotten in another way and did it, but it was a very turbulent time in my life. And I decided, I grew up in Mesa, Arizona, which is the second largest population of the Mormon religion in the United States. And most of my friends were Mormon. And so after high school, they go on 2-year missions, and then they do college. And so most of my friends were 6 years out from having a degree. And I looked at it and said, well, they were going to be out 6 years before they had their degree. And I was like, you know what? I like computers. I've been programming. I can make this a career, and I don't necessarily need to go to college. I don't need to understand how a computer processor works in order to do line of business applications. So I'm just going to start there. Could not have picked a harder way to do that. But graduated from the School of Hard Knocks, the PhD in how to bumble your way through building a career without a degree, and ended up creating one of PC Magazine's top 100 websites of 2004, building the first blog community for Windows. Back when Windows Vista was called something else and was going to be a lot cooler than it ended up being. So I got to meet Bill Gates. I got to go to Vegas for CES. I got to go to the MTV conference, or when MTV launched their streaming service with Microsoft, I got to be there. So I have this whole other life that was around that kind of stuff and being a developer. And then I started with this startup. It was called AdvancedREOI. I got that job from one of those freelancer websites, and I was just coming in on a small contract that turned into a big thing. And that's my backstory. Is I'm very creative. I understand business processes. I love taking things apart. When I was a kid, I'd take something apart and I always had screws left over. And so that's I like business that way, right? I can take something apart and I can put it back together and be more efficient, and there can be screws left over, and that's okay. So I love that. And I really enjoy digging into problems where most people won't dig into the actual problem. They'll ask surface questions, and then they don't actually diagnose and find the problem under the problem under the problem. So that's why I love conversations like this. And and that's after 5 years of tilting at this windmill with this startup. I decided that I wanted something different. And I saw these problems that were going on because of businesses and because people weren't looking at the problems in startups the right way, and decided that I needed to do something about it. And so that's what I'm working on today.
Cool. So, what's the elevator pitch? What was the advanced AI you said, right?
AdvancedREOI.
REI.
So,
what is it doing?
So in commercial real estate, brokers are responsible for the sale, and brokers will put together spreadsheets to help people understand what the investment in the property is. But those spreadsheets are overcomplicated and B, wrong. They will show you what's going on today in a building, and then they'll show you a pro forma that has all of the units at whatever the market rent is today, and show you those two data points, which turns out are like ranges on a spectrum, to say here's what's going on in the building. And they'll sell the pro forma as that's the opportunity. But what they're saying is, the day you buy this building, I'm going to kick everybody out and get all new people in at today's rents, and I'm not going to spend a dime on turning the building over. And that's an impossible scenario that they're selling people. And so we built a capacity algorithm to understand exactly when units turn over in a building and how rent increases 3, 5, 7 years from now, and how you make money when those things turn over. And so on a 300 unit apartment complex, it would take you 40 plus hours to build that spreadsheet out, and it would guarantee to be wrong. I could build one that was much more closer to being right in 5 minutes.
That's cool.
And so solving that problem and understanding how that worked really got me starting to think about capacity in general, and how do you look at what's possible and how things turn over. And that led to business capacity planning and the human capacity to get something done during a day and all that kind of stuff. And so that led me to here, but that was the original concept. And I kept in that process wanting to be able to run my own startup through that financial model, because a 3-year customer lifetime looks suspiciously like a 3-year lease. So that's kind of how the idea evolved. But that was the big thing. We built the software for that. Yeah, I'll let you go to the next question.
Yeah. So you started it in 2011. You joined it, and then you did it for 5 years. And
it was actually more like 6.
And then where were you located?
So I was here in Tallahassee the whole time. The company was based out of Santa Monica, California.
So you were remote before it was cool to be remote.
I've been remote long before it was cool, yes.
Me too. I'm loving it. I'm like, can we do this mandatory for the rest of our lives?
Seriously. Yeah, but they're saying we want to index on getting paid where you live. And I'm like, no. Screw that.
Yeah, that's a recurring conversation. Yeah. It's it has to be based on skill set. It doesn't matter where I am located. If I can do the job as good as any other guy or girl,
Right. Don't make me index my pay on and still be as poor as I would be in San Francisco just because it costs me less to live here. You need to index it based on the job, and everybody should be getting paid the same. And if I make the choice that I want to cut my expenses and live somewhere more affordable, then that's
my choice.
Don't penalize me for that.
Exactly.
So,
yeah. So, how would you, so industry and category?
So it straddled fintech. We really pitched it as a fintech play. And initially we were targeted at real estate brokers. So it was this intersection of fintech and commercial real estate tech. Which I thought would be sexy and exciting, was not. And then ultimately we did some digging and started going after banks at the very end of our process and trying to sell it to the underwriters. And so that would have made it a pretty much straight fintech play. Didn't quite get there though.
And then at what stage did the company die? Seed, Series A, B,
it was bootstrapped our entire life. It died a very slow, nearly 6-year, super painful death.
Gotcha. So no capital raised, but good upside to it. No investors to deal with. No,
just the founder my co-founder was the one that financed it and spent a significant amount of money on it. On the process.
And then just to set kind of the market, what were the key competitors at the time, or the closest ones
Oh
to you?
goodness. So, gosh, I'm gonna have to clear out the cobwebs on that one. So there were a couple legacy tools that you had to download and install. The name is escaping me right now.
That's fine.
But like our competition was software that you paid like $3,000 for and downloaded it and installed it on your machine. And it was like, and it felt like it was designed in like 1994 because it was. And so it came from the industry where you remember back then, dial up, right? AOL, and then you've got this installed software that sits, and there's grids and whatever, and forms that pop. It's the same kind of stuff, right? And so few people liked it, few people used it and were able to afford it, and so it left everybody using spreadsheets. So we talk about there are other competitors that popped up in the space, but our primary competitor was spreadsheets, and it really taught me how to fight that battle. Because pretty much my entire adult career, I've been building apps that replace somebody's either Excel spreadsheet or Access database. So how do you compete against that? And how do you think about, and even in my business today and what we're doing with planning, it's spreadsheets. So if you're focused on other people doing work in the space, you're focused on the wrong competitor.
Gotcha.
So
that's a good one. And I mean, like we all, like a lot of projects are battling spreadsheets. It's kind of, you know, a cockroach that never dies.
Yeah.
Constantly goes into a new sphere and aspect, for sure.
Right.
So how would you evaluate the traction that you guys reached, maybe in terms of employees or users or revenue, whichever you're more comfortable, you know?
So at some point we had 300 plus people that registered in the system and maybe created a demo account. We had no sales process. We had no, we had done some stuff with onboarding, but we didn't really have a good structure on how to sell at all. And I had my co-founder sold commercial real estate. That's how he got the money to be able to build the project. So it's not, I want to be super clear about this, so he may, if this is a video, you may see it at some point. It was not exclusively the fault of sales, but strategy and direction defined a lot of the process, and almost everything that we did along the way was wrong in some form or another. So that's how it works. It's death by 1,000 cuts. If you don't know what you're doing in the process, you are much more likely to make those mistakes. And yeah, so
I totally agree, because in my failed startup, we also had like marketing and onboarding was one of the issues, and sales, and it's hard. And the funny part is no, like even if you dig deeper, you don't know once you tried something whether it works or not, and what are the actual issues, right? And that's why, again, we're telling all of these deeper stories, because we couldn't come up with a sales cycle, but no, what exactly was wrong in specific type of thing you were trying to solve, you know.
And that's, again, usually a symptom of a different problem, right? Because if you're not able to come up with those cycles, if you're not able to see that there's something else wrong with the product, there's something else wrong with your approach, and these things are the side effect of that.
Exactly.
So we had that, and I'll just dig into it a little bit. So I came on as an advisor, as a contractor, to take a look at the code that was supposed to have been written by the previous person in that position and evaluate where the system was at. And so I wasn't even supposed to do anything. I was supposed to learn a little bit about the business and then look at the code and see, does this function according to spec? Well, I had to do the thing that I hated most in that job, which was to say no, and to say not only was it not up to spec, but I believe that very little work was actually done, and what was done is not usable. And I hate doing that as a developer because most developers think they're better than the previous coder. And like most people will make them, but I mean, we had to walk through everything. So I proved myself that I understand like what's supposed to be going on and that this wasn't the right way to approach the problem. The first mistake that I made in that process was thinking of my co-founder, because I was a consultant. I considered my co-founder the customer. And so I did not do any investigation into the market and asking his customers what they would want and how to approach the problem from their perspective. Mm-hmm. He came to me with the thing and said, can you build this? And he came up with the specs. It was a massively complicated product that had every possible field you could want. And I just started redlining through stuff saying, no, you can't ship this right now. No, you can't do this. So I broke it down to something that was shippable, and we shipped something. And I shipped it 3 different times. We built a prototype, the first full iteration, and then a full rewrite over those 6 years. I didn't talk to the customer and understand the customer until after the second one was done. Mm-hmm. And that was the first big mistake. The second time around building my current company, I spent a ton of time talking to customers first before I built anything. So that's step 1. You have to understand what your customer wants and be able to ask them the questions that get to the problem under the problem under the problem. If you are just asking them surface level questions because you're trying to validate your bias, you will end up on the wrong path. You have to approach it as a scientific experiment. You have to dig deeper, and you have to make sure that you are dialed in on an actual problem first.
Exactly. To just outline the target market and market situation, that kind of influenced what you're building and why, and gave the inspiration.
So and commercial real estate is a fun side of industry to talk about, right? Because you have multiple parties involved that have multiple viewpoints and perspectives and competing and conflicting interests. So my co-founder was a broker. So his job was to go out and find properties that needed to be sold, take them on, market them, and transfer that to a buyer, and to take a commission off of the deal on both sides of the transaction, right? And so if you're looking at why somebody is going to sell a building, well, if you've made an investment in something, it continues to be a good investment, you're going to hang on to that investment for as long as humanly possible until it becomes not worth your while. And so at a certain point, because all physical assets depreciate, there's maintenance on everything. At some point, maintenance is a problem for these particular group of people. And so they want to unload that investment. For some reason, it could be they're in a divorce, it could be there, any number of reasons, but it's not necessarily a great first place to be in. And so then the broker's got to come in and do rehab and talk about the potential of the building if you just do X, Y, and Z and make a model. But they're not paid hourly. They don't make money until a deal closes. And so because these deals take a long time, there is an incentive on the broker side to do whatever it takes to close that deal, even if whatever it takes means not fully representing what's really going on in the building, or doing the work to make sure that the customer is the right fit for the product, right? It's a sale. Yeah. I don't care about all of this. And when I went to go out and sell this, I went to the #1 multifamily broker in San Francisco, in this big office downtown, pitched the product and talked about why this is going to be of value to you. And he said to me very specifically, if my customers understood exactly how much it was going to cost to run this building, they would never invest. They would never buy it. And I said, so that kind of sucks. How do you deal with repeat business? How is anybody, if that's the case and you sell a building and the building goes south, how are they going to buy from you again? I said, I don't care if they're going to be a repeat customer or not. I'm going to find another buyer. And so like that was a wake up call. Like, wow, I'm really like talking to the wrong customer. Like this person is not going to be the target customer in my business. And so then on the buy side, like the buyer, all the weight is on their shoulders, right? So the seller's trying to get rid of a non-functional investment for them. The broker is trying to get their 6% commission, and that's the only thing they're focused on, because they got to eat and they got to make their car payment because they bought a really expensive car and all this other stuff. And so then the buyer is the one that really needs to understand what's going on and how the model works. The problem with that in our business was that buyers hide themselves, and for tax purposes, you create an LLC or a holding company for each building. And so you have a parent company that then owns the holding companies that then owns each individual building, because you don't want one building to take down the whole company.
Yep.
And if you pooled all the buildings together and one building went under, you'd screw the cash flow for everything. And so when you sell the business, often you're also like dissolving the LLC or the PC or whatever the legal entity is behind it. And so because they're investors and they're buying large assets, and to be clear, when you buy a building, you're not like, and to be clear, this is not going to be political.
It's fine.
But people like would criticize Trump for being a paper billionaire or whatever, not understanding how his assets work. You're not using your own money to buy a building when you buy a building, right? You're getting a mortgage just like everybody else. So you're leveraging your buildings and the assets that you have to be able to secure a mortgage for a building. And you're using the rental money from that in order to pay the mortgage. Yeah. It's not a whole lot different than having a house. There's just a lot more people in the building. So, but these people do have higher net wealth and higher net worth than other people. And so it's in their best interest to not let you know that they have that wealth, because then everybody and their mom's going to be calling them up for money one way or another. So didn't understand those market dynamics at the beginning and how the different customers were negatives in different ways in that transaction process. And we wanted to connect all of them together. So there's 3 different groups of people that have 3 different competing interests, and all have deal breakers or things that will make the process more complicated in order to be able to sell to them. None of that was considered, right? It was just, hey, there's this thing that takes 40 plus hours. We're going to turn it into, and there's people that buy this other product. So if we build a better product, they're just going to want to use it. Some of that was true, but being able to get money and turn that into a SaaS business was one of the real major challenges. And so lesson number 2 in that process is you have to understand what your customers, like, especially if you're trying to build like a network or an intermediation play between 2 parties facilitating a sale, you have to understand what every potential customer's mindset they're coming from is, what their personal viewpoint is going to be on how they handle things, and what are their motivations for being in that part of the business. Because everybody has motivations, and their motivations are not going to align with your product. Just because you're a nice person, or you're trying to do something interesting in the world, or you really want to build a great company, right? So just give me money because I got a good idea and I built something. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
And so that was major flaw number 2, was not understanding the motivations of our customers and how you are going to actively I want to say dissect, but then how are you going to like kung fu, like turn those objections into the reason why you're going to want to buy it. Too many founders make that mistake. Too many startups make that mistake, and not enough think about that until way later in the process. And sometimes it doesn't even happen until you actually have been funded for a round or 2. And that's why you see so many companies fail at Series A,
Mm-hmm.
because you didn't think about that enough earlier on. And now you don't have enough runway to figure it out, while you already hired too many people and don't have enough leads in the pipeline and are burning cash too quickly. And you think you have 18 months of runway, but you really have 12.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
well, I know there's like a whole question about fuck ups, and that's exactly how I'm calling it, because,
yeah.
you know, so an interesting thing about, and that sparked a little discussion among entrepreneurs and me, is, you know, well, you know, it's not always our fault, but it's our fault. And I'm like, yeah, there are two sides to every startup death, right? There are clear fuck ups that, you know, well, you know, you look back on it and you're like, I was so stupid to do X and Y and Z. But at the same time, there are a lot of external things that sometimes we can't control or we did not see coming, you know, like COVID happened, obviously, you know, and there are other things like regulation can change, or there's an interesting tweet about, you know, how one of the co-founders of Udemy, he was basically talking about one of the previous companies. He's like, oh my God, we were doing so good. And then in a day, something happened and we're in the shits. And he's like, well, Uber Eats popped up and basically took the market. So there are a lot of things that you cannot control, and there are clear fuck-ups. So like, are there other clear fuck-ups, or maybe outside challenges or outside hits that you saw coming or didn't see coming that contributed to the startup death?
So I saw it coming. After about a year to a year and a half in the business, I saw it coming. So in terms of fuck ups, there are a number that you can do. Most are self-afflicted, right? And you can say Uber Eats happening, like, may not feel self-afflicted, but if you weren't paying attention to the market, then you didn't have your ears to the ground and didn't have enough contacts out there and know what was going on, like, you probably could have gotten a head start that it was coming. A lot of founders have a lot of ego in terms of what they're doing. And now I'm the best in the market, I'll beat them. Well, no, they're coming up in the space, and they're coming up for a reason. And they understand that there's something that you missed, and you better figure out what that is real quick, or they're going to eat your lunch.
Because they studied you.
Right, exactly. You're in the market, they're not. They studied you, and they found a hole. So clearly, there's a lane they found to be able to, you know, draft behind you and then pull out around you and accelerate. And so you need to understand what those gaps are. So there were several fuck ups that we made, and that I made personally, and that my co-founder made individually, to contribute to the process. One is we didn't have a solid enough founder agreement. I ultimately never had ownership in that company at all. I was paid, which is great, because I was able to keep my family fed, right? Not every startup gets paid, but the downside of that is I had no equity. I didn't have a founder agreement, and we didn't have an agreement on what would happen if it closed. And so while I had no equity, I ended up getting stuck with half of the bill when the debts came due and the credit cards needed to be paid. I ended up with somewhere in the neighborhood of $16,000 worth of debt that I'm honestly still paying off today. And so that has been a significant damper on my future work and whatnot. So then my co-founder financed everything. He was in charge, and he ultimately wrote the check. So it didn't matter what I wanted to do. Ultimately, he had the final say on whether or not something was going to happen, because we didn't have an agreement on how that stuff would work, and didn't set aside a strategy in terms of like how budget was going to be allocated to X, Y, and Z. So we didn't have alignment on that at the beginning, and that caused a lot. Our company failed primarily because of interpersonal issues between me and my co-founder over disagreeing on strategy. And my co-founder was in charge of selling, and we thought that selling buildings would translate to selling software. It absolutely does not. The mindsets are totally different. In software, you have to sell on the vision of the future, and not get hung up on this feature doesn't work, or that feature doesn't work, or we had a deployment and there was an error happen. Shit happens. Bugs happen all the time. People understand that if you're talking to the right customer, and they'll work with you if you work with them, right? So your software is never going to be perfect. You need to be realistic in how you're approaching how it works and not oversell, because that's typically where people will churn off quickly. But my co-founder had a singular mindset in who he wanted to sell to, and that was brokers. We determined by, I would say, 2013, mid 2013, that was the wrong customer. And he still spent years trying to figure out just the right pitch, because he had sold he figured out the right things to say in commercial real estate that would land every customer every time. And so he was trying to find that singular magic bullet, where in software, where you're selling to competing people and whatnot, there is no singular bullet. You have to be able to have the strategy to know the personas and to be able to know how you're going to shift the conversation based on which subset of those personas you're working with. And so the third thing that I would say is the major fuck up that founders have is stubbornness. And there is a distinct difference between having a vision for what needs to happen in the marketplace and a long-term vision for how you're going to get there, and being a stickler on the detailed points in between. If you cannot, look, I'm going from, this is building a startup's driving from New York to San Francisco, right? And you want to have a specific structure for exactly how you're going to get there. But you cannot be stubborn and say that I'm going to make it to, New Mexico on the 7th at 5 p.m. Shit's going to happen. Stuff's going to happen along the way. And you need to be able to go with the flow to a certain extent and be able to take the detours and let the trip tell you what you need to do differently. There were several founders at my incubator that's here in Tallahassee when it got started that were super stubborn and did not take feedback on direction, and they're hearing things and they didn't want to change anything. My founder heard feedback, was trying to change within his particular thing, but couldn't get his head outside. Maybe we shouldn't be selling to this particular person. Maybe we need to think about this differently and approach how we're going to sell to people differently. And so that lack of ability to adjust and to learn and to be able to be wrong and be okay with being wrong is the third major thing that killed us.
Definitely.
For sure.
And then unless you have any other fuck ups or mistakes or anything that you want to focus on, I did want to ask, because I'll make a summary later.
Yeah, go for it.
Key causes of failure, but more of like, I always want to end on like a happy note, because I feel like it's, regardless of what happened, right? It's still a huge learning experience. Like, it is, I would not change anything with like my years spent on the startup that failed, because I've learned so much more than I would learn in school or anywhere else. You learn by doing so much faster. So like things that you're grateful for because of this experience, and let's call it an adventure.
So I hated sales. I hated salespeople, and I just happened to pick like the worst industry to work in from that perspective, because commercial real estate tends to attract a large number of like the type A pushy salespeople that you would never like want to interact with. And, they cold call and they'll dial, and you don't want to pick up the phone when you get one of those, what's this number? Same type of people, right? Great, fine. Wonderful human being. Okay. Not necessarily the role that I wanted. But I had to figure it out. It's two co-founders. If one is selling and one's building software, I built the product 3 different times. I feel like I did my job. And I feel like if my co-founder saw this, I'd tell him to his face, look, I did my job. I built the thing you told me to build. Then I went and built the thing that the customer wanted. It turned out that we didn't have enough runway to be able to close deals within the sales cycle when we pivoted to banks. A bank has a 9 to 14 month sales cycle, and we didn't have enough runway to support that. And I didn't know that at the time. But I said, okay, I'm going to figure out the sales thing. I'm going to learn it. I'm going to understand it. I'm going to figure out how it works. I hired a company based on that to come in and help me put some things together. And that led me on the path to building what I'm building today directly. I saw how this stuff worked and saw, oh, sales is a system. Building companies is a system. It's an engine. And I'm an engineer for a living. I can understand how this engine works. I can build software that will help other people understand how this works. And I can pull people on the same founder journey that I went on, but use the software that I didn't have to help them avoid these mistakes. And so that directly put me on this path to dig into not only why did my own company fail, why do other companies fail, and what are the challenges that they run into because they're so focused on product like I was, that they're not building the business and understanding that the business is also a product. And you have to have a product mindset in order to build. You can't just build one product. You're building two. You're building the thing you're going to sell to customers and the rest of the company. And you have to build them both at the same time. If you wait for product market fit to start thinking about that, you will always be behind for the rest of your life. When you're built, even if that business is successful, you will always be behind the 8-ball because you will always feel like you're playing catch up. You have to be thinking about it early enough, because that second product is what you're selling to investors. Investors don't invest in ideas. They've heard a billion fucking ideas. They want to know that you can actually do what you're going to say that you said you're going to do, and that this model will work so that they will make 10 to 100 times their money back. That is the only thing that they are primarily concerned about. And if you cannot answer that problem or and sell to that customer in that way, you will never get funded. And you will always think, well, investors suck and VCs suck. And no, you didn't sell to them right. You didn't understand what you were building, and you didn't understand that they don't give a shit about your idea. They want to know if your execution will bring them money. And so that's the best lesson that I learned out of it. I'm still dealing with that, and I still struggle with it. I'm fundraising right now, so it's still like a challenge in our phase. But if I hadn't gone through that pain and misery and 6 years of getting nicked up my arm every single day, I wouldn't have found this thing and be doing what I absolutely love, which is helping other companies avoid as many of these mistakes as possible.
This is cool. And yeah, I feel like that's an important kind of concept to understand, that there's a product that you're building or the service, and then there's a company. And it's interesting, it is a product. And then the funny part, I feel like that comes up a lot in pitch decks, right? Because like I sometimes help entrepreneurs with feedback on pitch decks, and a lot of them go down this rabbit hole where they are pitching what color the buttons are going to be and what's going to be on the screen. And I'm like, nobody gives a fuck if you're talking to investors, because that tells them nothing. They don't know whether you're ever going to get there. All they really want to see is actually, how are you going to make business out of it? That's going to make them money.
Will people pay for your product? How much are they likely? Are they going to tell their friends about it? Are they going to, does it have the level of virality that they're going to need in order to hit a home run? Because companies make all these mistakes. 9 out of 10 companies fail at every point in the process. It's not that 9 out of 10 companies fail. If you want on the VC track, it's 97 out of 100 companies fail, right? Because they're failing 9 out of 10 at every point along the way. You need to understand what you are going to do to fix that problem, and how are you going to get past that, and what is the strategy and direction for how you're going to approach that so you can be a $1 billion business. That's what they want to know. That's an entirely separate product. It's a separate sale. It may be 180-degree difference from the sale that you are making today with your customers. And you have to understand that, because they're not operators. They're not necessarily going to get it. They're not going to care about this problem domain unless you happen to find the right operator in the right sweet spot that experience that pain. So spend your time focusing on that if you can as a founder, but make sure your sales process understands that these are two different things that you're selling.
Exactly. So I'm out of questions, except maybe one, which is any shout outs, anything you want to share that you're building on, working on now, and in any way can we or I help you?
Yeah, so I wanna just take a second and say that I met Brett in 2015, I want to say, at the Launch Festival, when he was working with Jason Calacanis and that whole group. He was running the actual festival, and we were on the pier in San Francisco, and he was just a genuinely helpful person, and we stayed in touch while we were working through these things. He allowed AdvancedREOI to be to shadow his first cohort, and then we were a part of the second cohort officially. And that whole process really helped me start to understand a lot more about this. It led me down the path. It was part of leading me down the path to this thing that I'm doing today. So, and I didn't talk about that a whole lot. What we're building today is that, again, that capacity understanding in a commercial building, but towards people inside a company. So financial models in business tend to be driven by money, but money doesn't spend itself and money doesn't make itself. Mm-hmm. A business is people. And if you understand how you're going to put butts in the seat to be able to work on your shared vision and understand how much money those people can bring in and how much they cost, that's when you understand the expenses in the business. Because unless you have a large manufacturing company and all this other, like, you're going to have R&D costs, don't get me wrong. But when you're talking about scaling, it's almost exclusively people, depending on the industry that you're in. So we're focused on SaaS. SaaS is almost exclusively focused on scaling with people. And so we're helping companies understand that because as a founder, I didn't get my head around the sheer number of humans I was going to be employing if I wanted a $1 billion company, and how I was going to be able to get there as a founder to figure that out. So Brent was a huge help for that. He's been a huge help, been a great friend, and one of the first people that believed in me beyond what we were working on. So I've always been very appreciative of that. And basically, how you folks can help us spread the word. We're trying to help as many companies as possible get through that Series A gap and understand how to go from, say, $250,000 in sales to 3 million. How do you get from nothing to, getting to the point where you start to see your model scaling and you understand how that works? So anybody that wants to chat about that, I'm happy to share some more road rash stories and help talk through whatever challenges you're facing. So
awesome. Cool. Thank you so much.